You're listening to the Animal Heartbeat. My name is Kieran and Jose.
Hi, and I'm Jose. This is the world's only podcast dedicated to veterinary cardiology. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Mark's episode on the Animal Heartbeat. We have been discussing controversies in veterinary cardiology. Let's get back to it. Mark, with that scoring and the mine too, and your recent scoring, if I remember right, the case described as severe or advanced, and like survivals of 1 year. I think in your score they survived 1 year, something like that.
Yeah, it was about a median survival of about a year. Yeah.
So clearly those cases are advanced. My question was, I totally agree that maybe the early B2 they are mildly affected. Those dogs will live for 2-3 years. And so why would we start an intervention at that stage? We could wait a bit
our dogs, we had 80% of the mild B2 dogs alive at about 4 or 5 years.
Yeah.
If you're taking a 12-year-old dog.
Totally. So where do we draw the line? And my question is more, do we still need time for the drug to act and ideally allow for some reverse remodeling or delay adverse remodeling? Could we also then be starting the drug too late? If we only address the severe ones, which were cases with very big left ventricles, huge left atriums, I think you did like 2 or 3 times the standard deviation of normal, right? And so those are clearly very affected cases. Would you worry that then it might be a bit too late and they may not profit as much as the moderate ones? Or my question is, should we start at the moderate when they are scored as moderate and not as severe? Could we starting the drug at the severe stage be a bit too late and we may not profit from the benefits of the drug, if that makes sense?
I once heard Sonia Gordon say, is it better a little bit too early or a little bit too late?
No, and that was, I totally agree. I think that in some dogs, the moment you diagnose them, they're already severely affected. You don't have a choice. You put them on it because that's when you picked it up. If we're following a dog along and the dog reaches a moderate category, I think that our evidence suggests that the median time to endpoint on those was about 2 years, which I think is still a reasonable time at which to intervene. So my idea is that you have the conversation with the client saying, I think your dog is showing us a reasonable evidence that they are going to progress to the next level. And might eventually and have a reasonable probability of dying, not in the near future, but at some point they will be in congestive heart failure. There's a good chance. Do you want to start the drug now? And lay out here's what it should hopefully do. Here's by how much, and here's how much it's going to cost. And you can choose to give it or not give it. And you can, if you start later, you might still get some of that benefit. And when I've looked at the curves from the EPIC trial, my sort of thinking on those survival curves, because they include dogs from very borderline disease to disease that's going to kill you pretty quickly. So if we divide that survival curve up into all the dogs that died early on in the study, all had severe disease, all the dogs that were still alive at the end or didn't die, or lived for whatever it was, 1,500 days or more, they had mild disease. And the guys in the middle were the ones that had moderate disease. And there was an effect there, but it was parallel. And so if we imagine that survival curve as a gradient of severity from really severe in the top left to really mild in the bottom right, then the middle portion, at some point you should start the drug, but the benefit appears to be fairly similar as you climb up that curve for quite a lot of it. And it's about 200 to 300 days. So I'm going to buy you 200 to 300 days. And so to me, there's no reason to start really early because I'm just wasting your money. But even if I miss it by a little bit, by 3 months or so, I can probably still get that back. That's my interpretation of those survival curves, is that I can still buy you a fair chunk of time. And there was a recent paper that we just actually did in Journal Club where they actually argued that dogs that were started early on PEMO didn't live as long once they entered congestive heart failure. And I know when I talked to Adrian about that, he said, yeah, we sort of did an informal analysis of post endpoint survival, and it seems to be the case. But as he pointed out, would you rather live longer subclinically and have a shorter, horrible part of your life? Or would you rather live shorter subclinically and have a longer, horrible part of your life for the same length of life? And I think, we all know the answer, that we'd rather be subclinical for longer and have a shorter denouement, if you like, through congestive failure. So, no, I think that we can start too early. And I think that, based on these scoring schemes and looking at how these animals, what their natural history is, based on these schemes. And Michele presented a third scheme, and I'm thinking that we need to get together and all sit down and decide what we mean and what is one decent scheme. Using the natural history of these things, we know what these dogs are likely to do, and therefore I think that intervening at the point at which they've got moderate disease is a good compromise, both economically and biologically.
It feels like we need consensus on a scheme to come up with another consensus statement. And
yes, it's like the Wild West of schemes right now.
Yeah.
We've all got an idea,
We'll have a committee to decide on how the committee should run.
Yeah, well, and Gavin McCauley has another prognostic indicator, which is the left ventricular early inflow outflow ratio, which seems to work pretty well as well. Now, we haven't thrown that into these schemes, but it's a fairly easily obtained number by a cardiologist or somebody who really knows how to do Doppler echo. Should that, if we can get those data, maybe it'll evolve. But, we've got to move on beyond B1, B2, and we need to get rid of stage A.
Right. So my question is, who are the staging systems? Who are these consensus statements aimed at? Because staging them based on linear dimensions is straightforward and more accessible to people who are not board certified cardiologists. Whereas once we start introducing more complex variables, a little bit of Doppler echo, time indices, suddenly it becomes a very exclusive thing to assess. And as you've said, cost of living, cost of veterinary fees, they've both gone up. And that does limit the access to care. So do you think there should be a consensus statement that's aimed at GPs and then something more technical for the cardiologists, so we're all speaking the same language, or is that overkill?
No, and I've talked with a number of people about maybe drafting the non-consensual statement of more pragmatic approaches to mitral valve disease.
We might need to change the name.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think if we can take animals that we identify with moderate disease by these echo schemes that do require more and more esoteric measurements, and not overly esoteric, but somewhat, and then go, okay, well, let's look at the radiographs on these guys, and maybe let's say, and look at murmur intensity, and let's look at, because, there was the paper that said that if you've got a loud murmur, you should be on PEMO. It didn't actually say that, but that's what people are taking away from it. If you, look at potentially things like heart rate or whatever, I mean, there's any number of more easily measured pragmatic variables that we sort of discount because we've got the ability to echo. Maybe we can do a fairly crude job of saying, once they've reached these things, that's oftentimes, or has a high probability of being at least in the moderate category. And you don't need the echo then to tell you that that's the case, unless the owner wants it, whatever. But you've got a pretty solid basis then for thinking of these dogs as moderately diseased. And part of the problem, of course, is radiography, which is our fallback, is, I deal with this daily. People do not know how to read thoracic radiographs. We argue over them. There's so much breed variability that in some breeds, it's almost impossible to make a call about mild, moderate, and severe cardiomegaly. And then we're asking, untrained practitioners, because honestly, they haven't had the sort of levels of training that we've had or radiologists have had at interpreting those things. And we see this all from radiologists too. Oh, this dog has mild left ventricular. No, this is a normal Pomeranian heart, because I've echoed a bunch of them, and I know when I look at radiographs like that, they have normal hearts. What other metrics can we use to identify that at-risk or modestly or reasonably at-risk category where we are more likely to intervene? And, that's still out there. We need to come up with something, but I don't know what it is yet. Maybe it is a BNP score plus some other biomarkers, as Adrian says. Heart rate is a biomarker.
Exactly.
Respiratory rate, but yeah.
Just to highlight something you said that I think is a really important take-home message. As you mentioned with clopidogrel a bit, but what I think is really important about your diet and others on mitral valve disease is not urgent to treat B1s, because B2s, apologies. Because I see sometimes our residents go like, oh, LAO is 1.7, left ventricular diameter is still normal. Do I start pimobendan now? I think there's this idea that you need to start it fast as you can. That again, your data suggests that or shows that there's no urgency. It's fine if you miss 2 or 3 months or 4 months or 6 months. It's fine if you are within that mild to moderate severity. Is completely fine. And I think the problem is people then look very religiously to the 1.6 left ventricular internal diameter or 1.0 LAO, and 1.7 internal diameter. And then if it goes across that 0.01, wow, this is a B2 and should be started on pimobendan. So I like that people. That message that is not urgent. You can wait, and it's fine to wait.
And people have also taken it to where, well, it satisfies some of the criteria of B2, so therefore I'm going to start. So they start hedging and pushing the boundary out. Whereas you say it's got a mildly enlarged left atrium, normal left ventricle, but the left atrium qualified. So let's just start the drug. Well, now if you go to wait till they're moderately diseased, all of that indecision goes away. And then you've got cases where, he put a dog on chemo and then their chamber dimensions normalize because of a bit of pharmacological annuloplasty. Their leak gets a little smaller. Well, now they're no longer a B2 dog. Do you take them off the drug? At which point they're just going to dilate a little bit and open up, and then you put them back on. And so are you yo-yoing chemo, or what do you do? Right. Again, all that indecision goes away when you make a more pragmatic choice.
Either that or regression to the mean, which was something we also discussed with Adrian Bozus, right? Because those guys will just walk and wane around that cutoff, that line, and then one day they are B2, the next day they are not B2 anymore. So totally agree. Another big fight you and Luca have been going through, which is really fascinating to watch, and very clinically very relevant, is if dogs with pulmonary edema cough or dogs with mitral valve disease and pulmonary edema cough. So is cough a clinical sign of heart failure? Yes or no? So can you share with us your...
That's what we want, Mark. It's a simple yes or no.
Exactly.
We've been talking for a long time now. Let's keep it really simple.
So share with us your most recent data on that, if dogs do cough when they develop pulmonary edema.
So this was a happenstance little study that we did. And the paper is just about to come out. I just did the galley, so it's going to be out in JAVMA probably in the next week or two. When I looked at the delay data that Michele had sent me for the Minerva scheme analysis, I noticed that he had coughing in there. And I thought, okay, well, they recorded whether a dog was coughing or not at each visit. And I can then look at their left atrial size and at the end point when they go into heart failure, which was the end point of the study, and see and then look at their, was the dog coughing at some point? And if not, or at what point did it start coughing? And then I contacted Luca for his study because they had shown 12, 13 years ago with a regression analysis that the probability or the likelihood of developing a cough was associated with left atrial enlargement, but not with congestive failure. And my problem with that was that whilst I agreed, it was like, well, is it all left atrial enlargement or is it only at a certain point? So now I called Luca, I called Michaela, they sent me the data, and I sat down and analyzed it and found that, in fact, the probability of coughing was relatively low until your atrium got really big. And this also came about because I have a perpetual ongoing Rock'em Sock'em Robots fight with Mark Kittleson on VIN on the message boards about a whole range of things. And one of them is that atrial enlargement might be responsible for coughing in some dogs with mitral valve disease, not as a result of their left atrial enlargement, but because they've got underlying bronchial disease and large airway disease, which is then triggered by the additional component or factor of having a big left atrium that is rubbing on or squeezing or doing whatever to those diseased bronchi.
I think this is Luca Ferrison's story to explain the cough in dogs with mitral valve disease, isn't it?
Absolutely. And I agree with it. And, Mark said, well, we did studies to show that that wasn't the case. And I'm like, no, that study did not show anything of that sort. So I had the data. I sat down and I looked at it. And sure enough, I essentially reconfirmed what Luca had found, but I narrowed it down to the idea that it was only the proportion of dogs that presented with coughing increased when they got to the point of having large left atria, whether they were in heart failure or not. And even if you looked at the heart failure population, the dogs that went into failure, or at least were diagnosed with heart failure in those two studies that had less than severe left atrial enlargement, had the same chance of coughing as dogs with subclinical disease. So when their left atrium got big and they were in heart failure at the time when that cough was first detected, then they had a higher probability. Now, it doesn't mean that heart failure can't cause coughing in some dogs. And I think the best evidence of that I've seen, although it's only literally one soccer team's worth of dogs, was Carsten's data from years ago looking at Dobermans with heart disease. And Dobermans with DCM in their subclinical disease state never coughed, versus almost all of them had a cough when they presented with heart failure. So I don't think we can say heart failure can't cause a cough. And I think Dobermans are very particular in that they tend to develop fulminant, massive, sudden, rapid, acute heart failure when they do go into failure, which causes alveolar edema. And when you get alveolar edema, you develop a cough. If you've got mostly an interstitial edema, there's no trigger for a cough. There's no reason for you to be coughing when you have essentially interstitial edema, because those cough receptors aren't being triggered. And that's, I think, Luca's story again. It goes back to that. Our argument is that you shouldn't use coughing as a diagnostic tool for identifying dogs in heart failure. They presented with a cough. I don't give a crap about the cough. Figure it out without invoking cough.
No,
yeah,
exactly.
whatever your perspective, that's the message, isn't it? I think.
Yeah.
That's the message. And it's all driven from what I see daily. Murmur plus cough equals heart failure. I put on Lasix. Oh, and by the way, they got better on furosemide. Their cough went away. Lasix has a really good antitussive effect. And so all coughs will get better on Lasix. So, it's trying to readdress that and retrain clinicians to and ideally retrain the trainers of the clinicians to stop telling them that dogs in heart failure cough. And that's a good sign of heart failure, because it's not.
Yeah.
I think one of the problems is that a lot of practicing vets get their up-to-date information from pharmaceutical company leaflets. And there are certainly ones out there for cardiac products that say signs of heart failure. One I read recently said cough, syncope, something else. And I thought, well, they're not signs of heart failure, not primary signs of heart failure. It didn't say respiratory rate anywhere. So I think it's not just the universities, not just the referral centers that have got to get on board. It's the marketing people.
But they're quoting the dogma that they've read in textbooks, which
of course they are.
Promoting the idea. And if you go back, cough was always listed as a sign of heart failure, and
Absolutely.
they've got no reason to argue against it.
It's what we were all taught in school for a period of
Absolutely.
time, right?
Yeah. No, and it was taught on the basis that, yes, dogs with heart failure often cough. Lasix will resolve the cough. Ergo, heart failure causes coughing. And it was simply the wrong logic because there was a giant confounder in there.
It's just interesting that Dobbies will have that soft cough when they have congestive heart failure, and maybe indeed it's just as you said, maybe they have such acute fulminant um, uh, congestive heart failure, but then I think it needs to reach the airways, right? I think in alveoli
Exactly.
you still don't have cough receptors, need to reach the small airways at least, but this. Yeah.
But mucociliary clearance, because I was thinking this when you were talking, Mark, every time I see Luca, I mean, sort of mean to talk to him about it, and then we talk about something else, the kids, the family, whatever. But if you've got some alveolar edema that's just in the the terminal bronchus, is that going to reach your cough receptors because of mucociliary clearance?
I think if it's severe enough, it probably will. I don't know, but I mean, you can see these Dobies, and you look in Mark Kittleson's textbook, and they've got the classic picture of the Doberman that's literally got pink, what looks like fairy floss coming out its nose. So I think if you develop it severely enough, it will come up. And Dobies are not dogs that have large airway disease, and they certainly, when you look at their radiographs, even some of the radiographs on Dobies with like 65 millimeter left ventricles and horrible lungs. If you'd show me the films and show me a clear lung, I would have said that heart looks normal because they just hide their cardiomegaly so well and they don't squash those airways. So, I have to believe that in those dogs, coughing is a result of their heart failure.
I've seen a few of those Dobies with a very peribronchial pattern of pulmonary edema, which after furosemide, they really resolve. They don't look as if they have airway disease after furosemide, but they're really peribronchial, so they're almost nodular looking lungs. And I wonder if it is a breed thing in terms of how they present, and that distribution of the pulmonary edema is associated with some soft coughing because of it is actually affecting the airways directly.
Yeah. And another proof that the left atria is playing a role is the dogs after mitral valve repair, because those dogs after mitral valve repair, they stop coughing, or their cough frequency decreases when their left atrial size is normalized. So also suggesting that there's certainly an effect of LA size or left atrial compression of the bronchi and so on. So I think that's a good population to kind of nearly show a causation between LA size and cough.
Somebody in the meeting in Maastricht actually came up to me and she asked me about that, and I thought that's a brilliant study that we need to get Dan Brockman's group to do, is to look at dogs that are preclinical and coughing, so that, because once you go into failure, you could argue, well, you resolved their heart failure and their cough went away because you resolved their heart failure. No,
that's
take the preclinical dogs that are coughing and then do your surgery on them and see if their coughing frequency goes down. And
I think it does. If I remember, I remember Dan Brockman and the RVC group saying that they were observing that, but indeed that would be really interesting to because that data. I think that they will have that data. And
now with the TEER procedure, everybody's and their dog wants to do that, so we should be able to get a lot of cases.
But in those cases, the left atrial size doesn't normalize.
Listen, come on, we've started a TEER program, so I'm gonna get defensive now. We're early in our experience, but the cases that that we've done, the heart size is slowly reducing. It's slowly reducing because you don't do an annuloplasty, right? So you don't get the rapid reduction. But I was just listening and thinking, one of the early dogs we've done was a Cavalier with a really marked cough. And he was in failure. We're not doing dogs that weren't in failure yet. But actually what we've seen is his heart size, his atrial size has reduced significantly over the past months. And actually his cough is all but resolved now. All right, his pulmonary edema is gone. He's on a very low dose of diuretic now compared to where he was before. But I do wonder how much of that is his atrial size and his atrial pressure. I often wonder if the pressure is part of that because of the impact on the airways.
Oh, absolutely. And I think, and I still need to do a video or something, or do a demonstration at a meeting once, where I take a cardboard tube, like from a paper roll, from, paper towel roll, and get a balloon and push it up against, partially inflate the balloon and push it up against that roll, and it'll do nothing to the roll until you soak the roll in water and then push it up against it and show what, pre-existent bronchomalacia
Yeah,
and
nice.
and some pressure pushing up from it can do. Because I think you're exactly right. I think atrial pressure is the driver of that.
Amazing.
Mark, something else that you have published now a couple of papers on, which is also an interesting area, is to look at publishing and peer review, and how fast do journals publish paper from submission to publication. Which again, you have published a paper maybe, I don't know, 10 years ago, and now another one recently, and you look at the journal's performance. And that's something I've become really passionate about it through my work at JVM and so on, to understand how can we improve peer review, how fast can we review articles, trying to guarantee a very thorough review process and a fair review process and so on. Because now the situation is there are many journals out there. Comparing in the past 10 years, I think we have so many new journals, and there are journals out there that promise and have a very, very fast review process, crazy fast. Which makes you wonder which then clearly they cannot have a very thorough and careful review process. And then I guess as an author, you want your data to be published as soon as possible, as fast as possible, as some people, because they need it for their credentials, for example. And so you just need to accept that maybe you send to a journal that is maybe at a low profile, but then you get your data published faster and so on. So what I'm trying to ask you is, my concern is we'll end up having lots of papers out there published that have gone through a poor review process. They have major weaknesses and biases, but they are published and they will be cited. And I don't think we as a community, as a group, veterinarians, cardiologists, are very good at critical appraisal, very good at reading papers and critically read the papers. I think many people, due to lack of time and many other reasons, would just read the abstract. And so someone will read the abstract and take that paper, those conclusions, results as a holy truth or as a fact. So how do we address that? How do we address these new journals that, well, certainly there are good new journals out there, but new journals doing very fast review process of potentially suboptimal quality? That was a very long question. Sorry about that.
No. I understand, and I appreciate the question. And I think I'm not in a position to implement the changes, but I think we have to change the incentives. Currently, the incentive is and mostly, let's admit that mostly publishing is done by academics, and it's done for merit increases, for promotional reasons, for achieving tenure, or you've got some reason, some carrot for publishing. So publishing most quickly and easily can be quite attractive. And we identified two journals that were clearly outliers, and one journal that was sort of on the cusp of being, how is it humanly possible to publish that quickly and find that number of reviewers when the rest of us in the veterinary, academic circles, who often work for journals or review for journals, struggle to do a tenth of that or even less. And I think people will submit to those journals as long as there is an incentive for them to do so. So firstly, those journals charge considerable amounts of money. They're in it only for the money. And the more papers they accept and publish, the more money they make. Oftentimes, granting agencies will provide you with money to do open access publication. So there is no cost for the author then, if they've gotten an award or a grant to do a study, to then submit to that type of journal, because, I've got the $2,000 or $3,000 that it's going to cost. I'd rather have the paper published in a month. So I think we need to change the incentives, being that either publishing in a journal like that doesn't count towards your package, towards your curriculum vitae, towards your publication list, or is largely demerited. Funding agencies, or if it's coming from like within, a number of universities around the States, and I don't know what it's like in and it's going to change here right now, but in the UK or elsewhere, is that oftentimes there'll be intramural funding that'll pay for a certain number of open access publications. Well, the administration could simply impose an embargo and say, you cannot use those monies to publish in these journals. We've got a list of journals that we consider unsatisfactory for whatever reason, and we don't have to explain the reasons. We're just going to consider them unsatisfactory. And so if you want to use those monies to publish, you have to publish in these other journals, right? If you take away the financial incentive to publish in those journals, most authors will not pull $3,000 out of their pocket to pay for their own paper. I think that's the only way that we have of addressing that issue. The other thing that I've always said is, if these journals do such a brilliant job of recruiting reviewers and getting them to review within a week, because when you look at the publication speeds, that's about what they're taking. Tell us this magic, give us some of the magic sauce. Tell us your secret, because all of us could benefit. Science could benefit if we could all manage to publish that quickly and review that quickly and edit that quickly. So you've got to be skeptical about A, the quality of review, and B, whether it's even being reviewed at all. I honestly, I don't know. I suspect it might be, but I don't know. But yeah, cut off the funding stream and people will publish will submit to journals that are more reputable, if you like, or maybe more stringent.
So I think one of the big challenges with publishing in certain journals is to obtain the right reviewers with the right rigorous approach and the appropriate level of experience. It takes time. Everybody's busy.
Absolutely.
It can delay. Well, can it delay publication? It can take a long time, is what I mean, for those journals. And when people are training residents or they're up against deadlines for other reasons, sometimes that shorter, truncated process can feel attractive. And I guess what I've become more interested in is the importance of good, fair, but rigorous reviewers who understand how to read a paper and how to politely give feedback and critique colleagues who are publishing. Because I'm not sure all reviewers are so polite as we'd like them to be. And I also am not sure they're as experienced as we'd like to be with the process. So my question at the end of all that is, do you think we should be training our residents to review as much as we're training them to do research?
It'd be nice. And I think if you'd asked this question 30 years ago, the answer would be an unequivocal yes. I'm now starting to wonder whether we should have any of our residents do research, given that 95% of them are never going to touch another research trial.
I mean,
or do any research.
I'm inclined
or write
to
another
agree.
Paper, right? But so why are we making them do this when all they want to be is really good clinicians? But we need to train reviewers. I so often see reviews come back where they're picking apart. You need to put a comma here. You need to change this word to this word. I don't like the way this, that's copy editing. That is not reviewing.
Yeah.
And
true.
you can make your reviewing a lot easier if you just look at the methods, look at the results, ignore everything else, and just go, did they tell a good story and is it legitimate?
Yeah. Mark, I couldn't agree more with you, and I think Kieran and I share the same opinion. How many residents, how many specialists will ever publish a paper again after their residency? I think it's a very small percentage.
Yeah.
So I agree with you. I don't think we should, and you don't learn how to do research or write a paper by writing a small study during your 3 years or 4 years program, certainly.
Which by the way, your mentor has to finish for you because you're studying for your boards.
Yeah, exactly. So I totally agree. What I do think is really important is for people to critically appraise and read papers, because again, then we are training cardiologists to be great clinicians, and they will be great clinicians. And most cardiologists who work in private practice or work in academia and may not be publishing, but they will be reading papers. And everyone is very, very busy. So my concern is that people just end up reading the abstract or skim through the paper and then don't critically appraise the paper. And again, as the review processes in some cases will not be as good as they were in the past, and then those messages are just, people just take the wrong message. That's my concern. And I've seen that in, and again, some young cardiologists reading that I have trained, some of them, and they sometimes will read quickly a paper and say, okay, this is great, I'm going to start doing this paper prove this or that, and the paper was not properly assessed. And that's I think where we should, I think that's what Kieran was suggesting, that we probably should train our residents to know how to critically appraise a paper.
Yeah. So there's a couple of other things. One is, and I agree that we should try to do that. Although, again, once you're busy out in practice, are you really going to sit down and spend 2 hours pulling apart the nuts and bolts? One is that we need strong editors. And what I've noticed is that at American Veterinary Medical Association Journal, when Lisa Fortier came in, she created an atmosphere and an environment there where just last week I had a paper accepted with a colleague of mine from Cornell who was doing a study of he's an exercise physiology guy and looking at hunting dogs and using garments to track them. And we were looking at a whole bunch of stuff. We went through 2 rounds of review. We responded to the second round of reviewer comments. And a day later, we got an acceptance letter. And that's because the editor looked at our responses, looked at the concerns of the reviewer, said, this is appropriate. They've done a good enough job. I'm not going to bother that reviewer again. And I'm going to make the call that they did their due diligence and they've covered all the bases. End of story. Whereas I've seen other journals where it's going back and forth because the editor is simply shuffling papers and not actually making the call to say, this reviewer is now being unreasonable. The authors have tried to address this. I'm going to make the call to either accept or not accept. And it really, most papers should not go more than 2 rounds of review.
Yeah, because I think when they go beyond that, it's often niggly small things where the authors
and then it's
say,
opinion. It's
it's opinion.
My dad's bigger than your dad.
Yeah, and I sort of have a policy when I'm reviewing papers to be like, okay, well, this is my opinion. This is what I think. I think you should reanalyze the whole thing. And then the authors come back and they say, okay, actually, that's not our perspective. And often I read that and think, yeah, all right,
fair enough.
That's a difference of opinion. Okay, fine. Yeah, great. I've made my comment. You've chosen not to take it on board, and it's not like you're being unreasonable. You're being rational. Okay, fine, great. Move on.
I think
that's what review's about, surely.
Right. But Jose's point about the critical reading, and I think what we lack in our science, which medicine does a much better job of simply because of the volume, is to have critical abstracts and critical commentaries about papers written by somebody who has reviewed it or can look at it critically, so that you as a consumer can go, oh, okay, that makes sense. I never picked that up when I read the paper, and I don't have to because somebody's done the work for me to point out the flaws and the limitations and so forth. And there are abstracting services within medical world that do that. And we just don't have that.
Yeah, that's a very good point. That you are totally
very
right.
Interesting.
Because whenever you read whatever top journal, Circulation, New England Journal of Medicine, there are always 3, 4, 5 editorials from experts commenting on a good paper that was published on that issue. And you are totally right. Yeah. Then you get a review, an assessment made by an expert on that paper. Yeah, that's a really good point. That's probably, it'll be very useful. Yeah.
There are editorials and there are podcasts talking about the papers, Jose. I'm just saying. So sort of final question from me on that topic. We've talked about the problems, the lack of rigorous review, the potential delays. If we go for a rapid publication turnaround, maybe we're not getting the right review, or the process isn't doing our work justice as authors. So why bother? Why not just put it in an open access repository or put it on LinkedIn? Is that as valuable?
It's been tried. What it tends to do is, and especially in even more so now, I think with social media, it'll just garner a whole bunch of trolling and arguments back and forth and miss the point. That's exactly what happens in the world of mathematics. Archive is a preprint repository because it takes inordinate lengths of time to publish in math or maths. Antipodean and the Queen's English. So I've got a very good friend of mine who's a professor of mathematics here, and he says all our stuff just goes out and it just sits there for the rest of the world the moment we're done with the paper. Maths is a little more objective, hopefully, that somebody can actually follow your proofs and your reasoning. And so maybe that allows for less discussion and less controversy. I don't know. But I would worry. One, I don't do any social media, so I'd never publish again. That's not a problem. I think you risk just it degenerating into noise, and he said, she said, and I think there's still a purpose of guarding the gates a little bit.
There is enough noise out there that I think something curated and where somebody's taking responsibility for quality, I think is important.
Yes.
Yeah. Hey, Mark, thanks very much. There's been really a great pleasure.
No, I just want to thank you guys. I really enjoyed it. It's fun to blow your own horn sometimes. I do it way too much, according to my wife. She says you're the dumbest person I know with 2 board certifications and a PhD. So
this is what part of it, to give us a little perspective.
No, Mark, thank you very much. It was really, really great.
Yeah, we really appreciate
to have you here with us, and yeah, please keep doing that. Keep writing your papers and looking at data and yeah, you are a great critical thinker, and that's great, really great stuff. And yeah, fight all the dogmas out there. And
either that or I'm the chimpanzee that's throwing crap at the cage walls.
There's a place for both of those roles, I think. No, Mark, thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you, Mark.
As we said earlier in the episode, this is the final episode of season 3 of the Animal Heartbeat, which has included diverse topics and all of our cardiology icons who have joined us. So thank you so much to all of our guests who joined us, and thank you to all of our listeners. And Jose, a personal thank you to you from me for joining me on this podcast journey.
Thank you, Kieran. Always a pleasure. Thank you so much, everyone, for listening, and stay tuned. Maybe we'll have a season 4. You have been listening to the Animal Heartbeat. Thanks very much for our listeners.
Keep in touch by finding us on social media or sending us an email on animalheartbeat@gmail.com. Please remember to like, follow, and share to help us find new listeners. And make sure to check out our previous episodes wherever you get your podcasts from or on our YouTube channel.